The movie begins with US bombers approaching Japan during World War II. Lewis, a bombardier, leads the mission with his crew. They successfully hit their targets, but on their return, they face a Japanese fighter plane. During the aerial combat, their bomb bay doors failed to close. Lewis attempts to fix it manually, narrowly avoiding enemy fire. They fend off the Japanese fighters, but some crew members are seriously injured. Their aircraft is heavily damaged, and it's a miracle it's still airborne. The pilots tell Lewis that their base is 5 hours away, but they're unsure if the brakes are functional, making survival uncertain. The story then flashes back to Lewis's childhood. As a child, Lewis was a troublemaker, often pursued by the police. By age 12, he was drinking, smoking, and stealing. As an Italian refugee, he was bullied by American kids. After a fight, a police officer took him home and informed his mother about his behavior. Lewis's father, unhappy with his antics, wanted him to change, but Lewis was defiant. At a baseball game, Lewis is caught smoking and drinking. He runs away, and his brother Pete notices his impressive speed. Pete decides to train Lewis, encouraging him to become a runner. Lewis is initially unmotivated, but argues he can't be like Pete. But Pete reassures him, expressing his full confidence in Lewis. Pete further motivates Lewis by saying that running will keep him from failure, while not running could lead to begging on the streets. Lewis takes his training seriously. Over the years, he improves significantly and wins many races. During one race, another runner trips him, but with Pete's encouragement, Lewis pushes through and wins. He sets a new American high school record by completing a mile in 4 minutes, earning an invitation to the Olympics. As Lewis prepares to leave for the 1936 Olympics, he asks Pete to join him. Pete declines, believing Lewis won't win. Lewis agrees, but vows to prove himself at the next Olympics in Tokyo. Pete encourages him, saying that enduring pain is worth a lifetime of glory, meaning that overcoming hardships leads to ultimate success. After this, Lewis departs for the Olympics. Back in the present, they finally reach their base and attempt to land. Despite the aircraft's faults making it difficult, the tires screeching on the floor, Phil's piloting skills ensure a safe landing. Celebrating their landing, after landing the aircraft, Lewis sees his pilot, Phil, praying. Lewis, not a believer, doesn't understand Phil's faith. Lewis continues his training, running alongside a jeep and beating his previous time. He then learns that he and his team are assigned to a rescue mission using an unreliable plane made of spare parts. Mid-flight, one engine fails, and they must make the best of the situation. Both engines fail. Their plane is certain to crash land, and Phil instructs everyone to brace for impact. In the Olympics, Lewis competes in the 5,000-meter race. His family and town listen eagerly on the radio. Initially, Lewis falls behind, but in the final lap, he sprints past several runners. Although he didn't win a medal, he set a new world record by completing the last lap in 56 seconds. The 1936 Olympics were held, and Lewis dreamed of winning a medal at the 1940 Olympics in Tokyo. However, World War II began, leading to the cancellation of the 1940 Olympics, and Lewis couldn't fulfill his dream. Returning to the first scene, the plane crashes into the ocean and starts filling with water. The plane soon breaks in half, killing many crewmates. Only Lewis, Phil, and Max survive, getting into 2 inflatable boats. Mac is disheartened, believing their chances of survival are 0. However, Lewis and Phil remain optimistic and encourage Mac to stay positive. They have a few chocolates and some potable water. Lewis decides they will eat 1 piece of chocolate in the morning and 1 at night, and drink only 2 sips of water a day, as there's no certainty of rescue. In the morning, an aeroplane flies overhead, and they try to signal it with a dye and a flare gun. Lewis fires several times, but they fail to get noticed and remain stranded in the ocean. Disappointed, they discover that all of the chocolate is gone. Mac had eaten it all during the night. This angers Lewis, as their survival resources are now depleted. The 3 struggle to survive in the vast, seemingly endless ocean. After days without food or water, a seagull lands on their boat. Desperate, Lewis catches it, but they can't keep it down and vomit. They use the seagull to catch fish. eating them raw, which brings brief relief. However, the following days are bleak, leaving them discouraged. One night, feeling their lives slipping away, Lewis prays to God, promising to dedicate his life if saved. They survive the storm, and rain refills their water supply. Days later, they catch and eat a shark. Spotting a plane, Lewis fires the remaining flares. Just as it seems the plane will pass by, it turns towards them. Unfortunately, it's a Japanese aircraft that starts shooting at them. They dive into the water to avoid the bullets. When they resurface, they find their inflatable boats damaged. They manage to patch one boat, but all three must now fit into the same space. After more than 35 days adrift, Mac's condition worsens, and he slowly dies from hunger. Phil and Lewis are the only ones remaining, but their condition is dire. They can't speak or stand. As days pass, their situation worsens. On the 47th day, they spot a ship, but it's a Japanese vessel. They are captured and become prisoners of war, held on an island. After enduring days without food or water, they are finally given a bowl of rice, which they devour eagerly. One day, Lewis is taken from his cell for interrogation. The Japanese colonel identifies Lewis as an Olympic athlete. Lewis is interrogated by the Japanese about new American planes and bomb sites. Afterward, he and others are moved to a Tokyo prison camp, where they are greeted by many fellow prisoners. Lewis and Phil are separated in the crowd. The camp's cruel commander, Corporal Mutsuhiro Watanabe, considers all prisoners enemies of Japan. When Lewis glances at him, Watanabe demands eye contact and then beats him, causing his nose to bleed. He warns Lewis never to make eye contact again and orders the new prisoners to stay in quarantine until nightfall. At night, fellow prisoners inform Lewis that they have nicknamed Watanabe the Bird, since they can't use his real name. The next morning, all prisoners are gathered before the commanding officer, Watanabe. He announces that there is an Olympic athlete among them, Lewis, and then organizes a race between Lewis and a Japanese soldier. Exhausted and starving, Lewis loses the race and collapses. Watanabe then calls Lewis weak and brutally beats him with a stick. The prisoners keep up with the war by reading newspapers stolen from the Japanese. A Marine draws a map to track American positions. Lewis sees a prisoner who has had some of his fingernails removed due to torture for information. Despite their suffering, they all agree not to aid the enemy. The prisoners endure hard labor, such as cleaning latrines used by both fellow prisoners and the Japanese army. One day, while inspecting the barracks, Watanabe discovers the map one of the prisoners was drawing.
You like Saipan?
Later, Lewis tells his friends about his plan to kill Watanabe, whom he calls the Bird. His friend warns him that this would lead to his immediate execution. They realize that the only way to defeat Watanabe is by surviving. One day, Lewis sees American forces attacking Japanese territory, catching Watanabe's attention. That night, Watanabe wakes Lewis and beats him senselessly. Watanabe harbors a personal vendetta against Lewis, showing intense animosity towards him. Representatives from Radio Tokyo inform Lewis that he has been declared dead in America. Mockingly, Watanabe allows Lewis to contact his family, confirming his survival. Lewis is taken to a radio station, where he tells his family he's alive, but lies about his conditions as a POW in Tokyo. His family, including his brother Pete, now a Marine, hears the message. After the broadcast, Lewis is asked to speak again, this time reading a false script. He refuses, despite being offered release and a comfortable stay in Tokyo. However, Lewis declines the offer and returns to the camp. Watanabe smiles, saying that they could have been friends if not for being enemies. He orders the other prisoners to punch Lewis one by one to teach him respect. The prisoners initially refuse, but when one is threatened with a beating, Lewis urges them to hit him. Lewis endures punches from all of the prisoners throughout the day. A few days later, the American prisoners perform a play to entertain the Japanese army. Watanabe sits next to Lewis and shares that he has been promoted and will be leaving. Later, Watanabe departs from the camp. One night, the camp is bombarded by the Allies, destroying it completely. The next day, the prisoners are moved to a new camp with even harsher conditions. Lewis collapses upon seeing Watanabe, who delivers the same speech as before. Noticing Lewis, Watanabe demands he look him in the eyes. When Lewis doesn't comply, Watanabe beats him with his stick. The following day, the prisoners are put to work, loading coal onto boats, a grueling task. Several days later, while involved in the coal transfer process, Lewis is forcibly pushed from a considerable height, resulting in a broken leg. The following day, overcome by exhaustion from his laborious task, Lewis takes a moment to rest. Unfortunately, the officer catches sight of him and promptly brings him in front of a collection of wooden logs. Watanabe, seeking to administer punishment, commands Lewis to select one log and raise it above his head, a task Lewis reluctantly carries out. In a heartless display, Watanabe instructs the guard to shoot Lewis if he fails to maintain his grip on the wooden log. The guard readies his rifle as Lewis teeters on the verge of losing balance and dropping the heavy object. All eyes turn to Lewis, who valiantly clings to the log despite his depleted strength and the scorching heat. As Watanabe expects Lewis to surrender, the prisoners quietly support Lewis. Watanabe shows unease, waiting for the log to fall. Instead, Lewis defiantly raises the log higher, locking eyes with Watanabe and shouting in defiance. This act of courage inspires the prisoners. Watanabe's fury grows, demanding Lewis look away, but Lewis remains steadfast. Believing an easy execution is near, Watanabe brutally beats Lewis. At that moment, Lewis recalls his running days and conquers his fears. He remembers his brother's words, "One moment of pain is worth a lifetime of glory." After beating him, Watanabe collapses in exhaustion. Lewis remains unconscious on the spot until nightfall. The next morning, an officer announces the war is over and invites the prisoners to bathe in a nearby river. Initially fearing execution, they are reassured when an American bomber plane flies overhead, confirming the war's end. The prisoners celebrate in the river. Supplies soon arrive at the camp, and the liberated prisoners eagerly take them. While they celebrate, Lewis goes to Watanabe's cabin and finds it empty, with only a cane and a photo left behind. Upon returning home, Lewis kisses the ground and reunites with his family. In 1946, he married and had a son and daughter. True to his promise, he devotes his life to God. Phil also survives the war and marries. Watanabe hides for years as a war criminal until granted amnesty by the US for reconciliation with Japan. Later, Lewis, driven by his faith, goes to Japan to forgive those who captured him, including Watanabe, who refuses to see him. Lewis fulfills his Olympic dream at age 80 by running with the Olympic torch in Tokyo. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.